The GUR struck a marine oil terminal in Russia's Krasnodar region with drones. Ukrainian defense forces also targeted an enemy ammunition depot and a storage site for attack UAVs. We will provide detailed information about these and other enemy targets that were hit. Coming soon. One less war criminal. In Moscow, the car of Major General Finil Sarvarov, head of the Operational Training Directorate of the Russian Armed Forces, exploded. Their flying days are over. A successful Ukrainian intelligence sabotage at a military airfield in Lipetsk. 2 enemy Su-30 fighter jets were blown up. The operation was prepared over 2 weeks. There is a good chance that we will reach a peaceful settlement. And there is a good chance that we won't. This is how US Vice President J.D. Vance summed up all the Trump administration's peace efforts in a single sentence. Meanwhile, Senator Lindsey Graham has already demanded that Kyiv be provided with Tomahawks. If Moscow does not stop its invasion of Ukraine, all the inside information on the negotiations in Miami. We'll talk about this and more right now, but in the meantime, don't forget to like this episode. Russia may resort to massive strikes on Ukraine during the Christmas holidays. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated this at a meeting with diplomats. According to him, such signals from Russia are a form of intimidation, to which Ukraine responds by stepping up intelligence efforts. When Russia says there will be no Christmas truce, that's always what they say, emphasizing threats. After such signals, I asked to strengthen our intelligence as much as possible so we can clearly understand where we stand, Volodymyr Zelensky noted. A powerful blow to Russian aviation. The Lipetsk military airfield came under attack. According to updated information, 2 enemy Su-30 fighter jets, both expensive, were destroyed. In addition, UAVs attacked the seaport, Taman in the Krasnodar region. Meanwhile, Russian troops have begun cross-border attacks in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions. More details about what is happening on the front line in our military review coming up next.
The Russian army is down $100 million. This is the estimated scale of losses from the operation by Ukraine's GUR, during which the Russians were relieved of their Su-30 and Su-27 fighter jets stationed at an airfield near Lipetsk, Russia. Ukrainian intelligence operatives spent only 2 weeks preparing for the operation. Late in the evening, from December 21st to 22nd, new explosions rocked the Krasnodar region. Explosions went off in the village of Volna. It is reported that drones attacked the Taman seaport. The strike damaged a pipeline at one of the terminals. A fire also broke out. According to the operational headquarters of the Krasnodar region, as a result of the drone attack, 2 piers and 2 ships were damaged. Senator Lindsey Graham stated that the United States should provide Ukraine with missiles. Tomahawks if the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin refuses a peace agreement.
This is an element of military political pressure on the Russian Federation. It should be noted that the United States has not stopped providing Ukraine with intelligence data and accordingly expanded military technical assistance for even an hour.
Telegram channels are publishing information about the American electronic reconnaissance aircraft, the Bombardier Artemis. According to the information provided, it took off from the Mihail Kogalnicianu airfield in Romania and is conducting reconnaissance over the Black Sea.
The successful strike by Ukraine's defense forces on the submarine in the port of Novorossiysk is first and foremost an element of a joint operation with our strategic partners. What we are talking about is At the moment the strike was carried out by the naval drones, an American airborne early warning aircraft was spotted in the sky over Crimea.
The reconnaissance range of the Bombardier Artemis 2 aircraft is 600 kilometers. It can detect certain objects, radar stations, communication stations, even as far as Rostov-on-Don, Donetsk and Kherson. On the night of December 22nd, the Russians attacked Odessa, Ukraine. The Institute for the Study of War reports that the occupiers have become more active in the north of Sumy and Kharkiv regions, carrying out limited cross-border attacks there.
This is the so-called tactic. 1,000 cuts, that is, simultaneous strikes in several directions to distract operational reserves of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine from the main direction of the Russian attack, and that is the Donetsk region, Pokrovsk, the Kostiantynivka-Lyman direction.
On Sunday, December 21st, deep state analysts reported that the occupiers had captured the village of Zvanivka in the Donetsk region. A striking elimination of a war criminal. Russia has confirmed the death of Major General Finil Sarvarov, head of the Operational Training Department of the Russian Armed Forces, who participated in combat operations in Chechnya, Syria and Ukraine. The Russian investigative committee has already, so to speak, found those responsible and is traditionally considering the version involving Ukrainian special services.
The head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense, Kirill Budanov, commented on the peace talks in Miami. In an interview with Forbes, he noted that the dialogue is complicated and the negotiations themselves are multilateral and complex, not just bilateral. Let me remind you, the head of the main intelligence directorate personally participates in the peace negotiations and is able to assess the intentions of the United States by picking up on subtle signals and the open demands of the White House team. In fact, they have given the process new momentum and energy. I can't say that I'm optimistic about the future, Budanov concluded in his conversation with Forbes journalists. And US Vice President J.D. Vance stated that progress has been made at the peace talks aimed at achieving peace for Ukraine, but there is still no confidence in a peaceful resolution. I can't say with certainty that we will reach a peaceful solution. I think there is a high probability that we will, but there is also a high probability that we won't, said the US Vice President. At the same time, speaking at the America Fest Festival, Vance noted that the Donald Trump administration considers supporting elderly US citizens a priority, and not aid to Ukraine. We believe that we should respect our parents, not send all their money to Ukraine, J.D. Vance said manipulatively. Putin is ready to negotiate with Macron. This was reported by the dictator's press secretary Peskov. What does Putin intend to discuss with the president of France and why with him specifically? What new developments are happening behind the scenes of the peace talks? When and in what form will the peace agreement be signed? All the details coming up.
Negotiations on the American-Russian diplomatic front are ongoing. Their outcome could significantly affect the future course of international relations.
We do not consider ourselves responsible for the loss of life because we did not start this war.
French President Emmanuel Macron stated that Europe will have to find a way to engage directly with the Kremlin leader while the US is advancing peace talks.
Either a lasting peace will be achieved within the framework of the current negotiations, or we will find ways for Europeans to re-enter into dialogue with Russia, transparently and in cooperation with Ukraine. It will once again become useful to talk to Vladimir Putin.
Peskov commented on Macron's words and was quick to state that Putin is also ready to engage in dialogue with him.
He spoke about his willingness to talk with Putin. Here, it's very important perhaps to recall what the president said during the direct line. He also expressed his readiness to engage in dialogue with Macron. Therefore, if there is mutual political will, this can only be seen as a positive development. In
Europe, they are beginning to come to the conclusion that ignoring the dictator simply doesn't work. Macron has repeatedly tried to establish a dialogue with the Kremlin, but this has yielded no results, and he has become an outspoken critic of the Russian dictator. Macron's remarks were also commented on by Zelensky, who noted that he prefers to maintain US involvement in the peace negotiations. We must fight for the United States of America. We must fight for the format where we are together with all our allies, with America as a mediator, and with our European allies who support us. The US, in turn, has proposed direct negotiations between Ukraine and Russia.
Indeed, the US said that they would have a separate meeting with representatives of Russia. And the Americans proposed such a format: Ukraine, America, Russia. And probably representatives of Europe. Ukraine,
America, Russians, and since there are European representatives there, probably Europe as well. The issue of territory, as well as the status of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the use of frozen Russian assets for Ukraine's reconstruction, remain the most difficult topics within the framework of a peaceful settlement of the war. Discussions
are being held constructively. They started and will continue today and will also continue tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Ukraine has repeatedly stated that it does not intend to give up Donbas, but Zelensky said that they are ready to withdraw troops from Donbas if the Kremlin takes similar measures.
if you want a troop withdrawal anywhere, identical mirror steps are always taken. If we withdraw by 5 kilometers, then they withdraw by 5 kilometers as well. We move back 10 and they move back 10. And then there is such a demilitarized zone.
One of the components of security guarantees for Ukraine should be partial funding of the Ukrainian army by partner countries. The number of Ukrainian armed forces will thus reach 800,000 people. The composition of the American side remains unchanged. Trump's team, Jared Kushner, and investor Stephen Witkoff Rakhmasov, I am truly very glad to see you here today. It's wonderful to finally meet. Which particular part of the city did you manage to explore and experience? I heard you took a comprehensive and delightful tour all around the magnificent city. That sounds absolutely beautiful and quite memorable, doesn't it? A potential sign of bias against Russia. The Wall Street Journal noted that the tactic of the Kremlin dictator was to push out professional American diplomats and establish a dialogue with representatives of major American business. Trump trusts Witkoff as a longtime friend, with whom he is close on a family level.
Steve is an excellent negotiator, but I noticed one particular trait in him. He had an amazing personality. He worked in real estate in New York and knew little about rivers and borders in Russia and other places where he worked. He knew nothing about that.
The US president shifted responsibility to his associates and distanced himself from the negotiations. The Kremlin stated that even by phone, Trump and Putin do not plan to have a direct dialogue before the end of the year.
And before the end of the year, is the call to the country possible?
There is currently no schedule yet. However, if necessary, it could definitely be arranged and made.
At the same time, Putin continues to send signals about his readiness to continue the war.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham called on Washington to take a much tougher stance toward Moscow if the Kremlin refuses a peaceful resolution to the war against Ukraine. Graham stated that the current diplomatic efforts are not yielding results, and the Russian dictator Putin continues to ignore the proposal to cease hostilities. He noted that if Moscow once again rejects a peace agreement, US President Donald Trump should resort to more radical measures. This is not only about expanding sanctions pressure, but also about significantly increasing military aid to Ukraine to strengthen its defense capabilities. If Putin says no, we need to radically change the game plan, including providing Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, so that it can strike missile and drone manufacturing plants in Russia. I would go all in, said Lindsey Graham. The senator also proposed passing legislative initiatives to impose high tariffs on countries that purchase Russian oil, designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, and strengthen oversight of tankers transporting Russian sub-sanctioned oil. Russia's economy, which for the fourth year in a row has been spending heavily on the war, is entering its most dangerous period. Russia's reserves are depleted, sanctions are hitting oil and banks, and 2026 could bring a financial crisis, writes the Washington Post. Despite US President Donald Trump's statement about Russia's superiority in the war against Ukraine, economists assert that Russia's position is weaker than ever since the start of the full-scale war. The Kremlin has spent most of the cash reserves and borrowed funds that allowed it to finance record military expenditures. And the screws are being tightened on Russians more and more. In Finland, Boris Rothenberg's villa has been seized, and banks in Europe and beyond are massively blocking and halting financial transactions for Russians. All the details are in our report.
While Putin keeps pouring more and more money into the war against Ukraine, the collective West is emptying his pockets. And it's not just about Kremlin oligarchs, but about the closest friends of the Kremlin dictator.
They've crossed every possible line in vain.
The other day in Finland, authorities seized the villa of billionaire Boris Rothenberg, the very same brother, no, not an acrobat, but a judoka. Boris Rothenberg, together with his more famous brother Arkady, practiced with Putin judo, and as Putin rose to power, so did his friends, the Rothenbergs.
Arkady Rothenberg, a childhood friend and sparring partner of Vladimir Putin in the judo club in Leningrad, is one of the most influential and wealthy people in modern Russia. According to Forbes, in 2025, Arkady Rothenberg's fortune is nearly $5.5 billion. Boris Rothenberg, Arkady's younger brother, is also a billionaire. According to Forbes, as of 2025, Boris's fortune is $1.3 billion.
But thanks to Putin, they not only became rich, but also gained access to government administration.
So that, again, and I'll repeat this 100 times, so that our country is ahead of everyone, so that the Russian flag is there, so that it returns to its rightful place, to the first place.
It was specifically to the Rothenbergs, as the media reports, that Putin entrusted the nationalization in Russia.
It's a truly great temptation for those who frequently interact with me to somehow get deeply involved in this particular situation. But I can still say with confidence that the people I consider my friends, and I do have such friends, conduct themselves very reservedly and with dignity, and I am not ashamed of them.
However, the Rothenbergs' powers do not end there. Recently, the Wall Street Journal wrote that the Rothenberg brothers, together with two other oligarchs very close to Putin, Gennady Timchenko and Yuri Kovalchuk, held secret negotiations in the United States. They discussed joint projects in Russia. According
To the publication's information, during these secret meetings, representatives of these Russian oligarchs offered American companies access to gas fields, rare earth metals, and major energy assets. Putin's wallets were offering gas concessions in the Sea of Okhotsk, and also at 4 other sites. They also mentioned the extraction of rare earth metals near the nickel deposits of Norilsk and in 6 undeveloped regions of Siberia.
But let's get back to the problems of Boris Rotenberg and his luxurious Villa Hanka. The financial authorities seized it for, you won't believe it, debts. Specifically for non-payment of property tax. And this isn't the first such case involving Boris Rotenberg's property in Finland.
Rotenberg failed to pay the property tax, which amounted to several thousand euros. Due to Western sanctions, the businessman cannot transfer money to accounts in Finnish banks. Earlier, the Finnish authorities seized commercial property in Helsinki that belonged to Rotenberg's company. The reason for the seizure was a debt of 27,000 euros for utility services.
Representatives of the Russian oligarch believe that the property will be returned. Well, Roman Abramovich probably also believed he could dodge and save his money. But in the end, the UK authorities are demanding that the Russian oligarch transfer 3 billion euros from the sale to aid Ukraine.
This is what we have here.
The final warning for Abramovich. Otherwise, London will take him to court. Interestingly, a condition of that very deal for the sale of the club was that Abramovich would not profit from it. He himself also promised to direct the money to help those affected by the war in Ukraine. But now he believes that the proceeds from the sale of Chelsea should go to all victims of the war, including Russians. However, Abramovich omitted the fact that if Russians are suffering from the war, the blame for this lies with Putin and the Russians themselves, who, if they didn't go to fight personally, then supported the invasion of Ukraine. And now, in fact, they're paying for it, although not entirely since they can't actually pay. Literally. Banks in Armenia, Serbia, Kazakhstan, and other countries have tightened control over transactions by Russians. It has reached the point where some countries have even suspended banking operations on Russian accounts altogether.
Banks in Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Oman have increased individual checks on transactions by Russian citizens, and company branches in Armenia and Serbia have even started suspending certain operations. These measures affect both individuals and legal entities. And
all this is because Russia has ended up on yet another EU blacklist. A list of countries with a high risk of money laundering and the financing of terrorism. According to even Russian experts, Russia being included on this list of countries will have much deeper consequences than the sanctions.
The existing restrictive measures have complicated certain operations but have not created insurmountable barriers. However, Russia's inclusion in the EU's black or gray list as a high-risk jurisdiction in the fight against money laundering and terrorist financing will have much deeper consequences. At the state level, this essentially means a further slowdown of the economy.
Music to our ears. Another nail in the coffin of the Russian economy.
While the Kremlin throws Russia's small ethnic groups into the furnace of a senseless war, something is beginning to happen in their homeland. Something Moscow fears most of all, an awakening. In Bashkortostan, voices are growing louder about humiliation by Russia, about political prisoners, and about the real losses in the so-called special military operation, losses that have been hidden from people for years. Fear is fading, replaced by anger and awareness. More about the underground movement and a people beginning to awaken in our next segment.
Bashkortostan is protesting. In the Russian dictatorship, it is becoming increasingly difficult to manipulate the peoples within the country. And the reason is that not so long ago, cultural institutions in Bashkortostan held an event for Bashkir Language Day, but the Bashkirs decided to use this moment to protest. The posters featured anti-imperial slogans and also mentioned political prisoners.
The Republic of Bashkortostan, in this particular regard, and the national political movement, the Bashkir movement is probably one of the most active today in the Russian Federation.
On the official websites and social media pages of clubs and libraries, posters, photos, and texts in the Bashkir language were published. They state that empires have historically forced conquered peoples to switch to the dominant language, depriving them of political will and the ability to act in their own interests. In
history, many empires forced conquered peoples to switch to their language because they understood that a native language strengthens national identity and unity. This, in turn, makes it harder to forcibly impose an outside will and gives people the opportunity to act in their own interests. Those who changed the language also tried to change the very essence of the people.
A number of publications also mention historical figures who fought for the autonomy and independence of Bashkortostan.
The Bashkirs have always been good warriors. Bashkiria, let me remind you, yes, is historically described and formulated by the Russian authorities as the voluntary joining of Bashkiria, including to the Russian state, the so-called Russian Empire. However, all of this happened by fire and sword.
Interestingly, sources from the Not Moscow resource in Bashkortostan suggest that this action is a prank since something similar has happened before. In particular, at the end of November, the Republic held memorial events using the number 8,000.
At that time, state institutions published materials with the hashtag 8,000 heroes, in which it was claimed that Bashkortostan had lost more than 8,000 people during the war in Ukraine. At the same time, the authorities of the Republic have not officially announced such figures. But
there are more serious threats for Russia. Recently, the Bashkir Partisan movement has been developing actively. I am
Kurdan. I represent the underground of the Bashkort Company. I am the voice of the Bashkirs and I am ready to speak for myself. My ancestors fought for freedom and I am ready to see it through to the end. Bashkiria will be free. Become a part of the Bashkort Company.
The number of members in this company is growing rapidly. Bashkort. The Bashkort Company itself is a military unit of the International Legion of Ukraine's Territorial Defense, formed from Bashkir volunteers in 2022. And now more and more videos are appearing, calling people to join their ranks.
Bashkirs unite. The underground is growing.
More and more prominent Russian cities are being beautifully decorated with meaningful inscriptions in the esteemed name of the renowned Bashkort Company's expansive field of operations.
Putin's Russian regime. He is diligently trying his utmost best to actively suppress these burgeoning national liberation movements, and in actual fact, if we look closely at the significant losses, the proportions of the peoples who inhabit the Russian Federation, who suffers the most today from the sending of so-called fighters to the so-called special military operation? It's the small ethnic groups, including the Bashkirs. And in my opinion, this is being done deliberately.
No one wants to die in a war against another sovereign state. And no one understands this better than the Bashkort Company, which continues its fight against the Kremlin's bloody dictatorship.
The collapse of the Russian Federation, which is inevitable for any empire, I'm not saying it will happen tomorrow, but it will begin precisely from the so-called national republics.
And apparently they intend to intensify this struggle. And for Putin's regime, this is very bad news.
They appeared and disappeared immediately. A mysterious story surrounds the declassified files of elite procurer Jeffrey Epstein. How do these revelations threaten Trump, and why did the US Department of Justice urgently remove some of the files from public access? All the details are coming up next, and don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to the Ukraine Today YouTube channel.
The US Department of Justice is scrubbing Jeffrey Epstein's files that are connected to Donald Trump. According to
at least 16 files disappeared from the publicly accessible webpage of the Department of Justice, which contained documents related to Jeffrey Epstein, including a photograph of President Donald Trump less than a day after they were published, without any explanation from the government. During
the 2024 election campaign, the so-called files of financier Epstein, who was suspected of pedophilia and sex trafficking, became one of the populist tools of candidate Donald Trump. There was a moment when you had doubts about the Epstein case. Regarding the published documents, why did you have doubts?
I don't think I did. I was never on his island, fortunately, but many people were.
MAGA supporters actively spread conspiracy theories about the financier's death. In the American prison, influential Democrats are trying to hide Epstein's connections with former Democratic President Bill Clinton. The popular conspiracy theory among Americans was eagerly embraced by Republican leader Trump, who promised to release files and photos if he won.
For many, it seems strange that the list of people who visited the island has not been made public. Yes, it's very interesting, isn't it? Maybe it will be made public. I would lean toward disclosing the Epstein case. I have no problem with that.
However, after winning the election, Donald Trump's position changed dramatically. The head of the White House began calling the documents boring lies, doing everything possible to prevent the promised publication. It got to the point where Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor accused the president of putting pressure on Republicans.
He is going all out against me to scare the others before next week's vote. It's incredible how hard he's trying to prevent the Epstein files from being published, that he's willing to stoop to this level.
After part of the files from the Epstein case were published, it became clear that the documents and photographs primarily damaged the reputation of the current US president. The court documents describe in detail how Epstein allegedly introduced a 14-year-old girl to Trump at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. During a meeting in the 1990s, Epstein nudged Trump with his elbow and jokingly asked, referring to the girl, "Nice, right?" Trump smiled and nodded in agreement. In addition to Donald Trump, dozens of American show business stars appear in photographs with the financier. For example, Michael Jackson and Mick Jagger, top politicians Bill and Hillary Clinton, the younger brother of the British king, Andrew, as well as one of the richest people in the world, Bill Gates.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.